Greetings to baristas. This is the second half of my video on the National Defense Authorization Act. There are much howlings that this act is an unprecedented compromise of democratic principles in the free republic of the USA. Yet really it's business as usual whenever the shit hits the fan, some moment of crisis. In part one, we saw how the Bureau of Investigation was founded in 1908 by administrative fiat behind the back of Congress. It was, of course, renamed the FBI in 1935, and as I'm sure you all know, this became the springboard and private toy of the most hated secret policeman of the free world, John Edgar Hoover, the American Fouché in the flesh. Hoover built a career on blackmailing any and everyone, not just alleged subversives, with his bullshit secret files. The real damage was the abuse of his authority as National Police Chief to make his slanders, rumors, and innuendos stick just on his own word. The source of his powers began in Wartime Security Acts of 1918, when the U.S. was on its first venture to make the world safe for democracy. It began by destroying it at home. As we see, the enduring traditions continue. In 1916 occurred the notorious explosion of the Black Tom Island Munitions Depot in New York Harbor, not too far from 9/11's Ground Zero, allegedly by German agents on July 30th, to stop U.S. arms and shells from being shipped to the Entente war powers. This was the equivalent of a 5.0 earthquake on the Richter scale, for its time as notorious as 9/11, if not nearly as fatal. As a result, the Free American Republic gained the Espionage Act of 1917, prescribing a fine of $10,000 and 20 years in the slammer for anyone who attempted to convey false reports or false statements with intent to interfere with U.S. military forces. This was followed forthwith by the Sedition Act of 1918, likewise providing a $10,000 fine and 20 years in a federal calaboose for anybody tempted to utter, print, write, or publish any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the form of government of the United States, or the Constitution of the same, or the uniform of the Army or Navy of said United States, or any language intended to encourage resistance to the US of A, or to promote the cause of its enemies. Sound familiar? The experts who crafted the Patriot Act and the NDAA knew their precedents. Later that same year came the third stooge of this totalitarian trilogy, the Alien Act. Any aliens who believed in the violent overthrow of the United States government or assassinating its officials should be barred from entering the United States. Well, on the surface, that sounds reasonable enough, but then it went on to provide that any no-good foreigner, you know, the types whose surnames end in vowels or even goofy enough consonants, who subsequently is deemed to have become one of those class of aliens after his lawful entry, shall be taken into custody and deported. That at least is more humane than renditioning someone to an offshore site for enhanced interrogation. The U.S. was still relatively new to totalitarianism then, unlike our modern-day body of legal experts. Woodrow Wilson, as he pondered taking the USA into war, said to a reporter, "It will require illiberalism at home to reinforce the men at the front. The spirit of ruthless brutality will enter into every fiber of our national life, infecting Congress, the courts, the policeman on the beat, the man in the street. Conformity would be the only virtue, and anyone who failed to conform would pay the penalty." English journalist A.C. Gardiner recalled, "No one who was in the United States, as I chanced to be, will forget the feverish condition of the public mind at that time. The name radical covered the most innocent departure from conventional thought with a desperate purpose. America was the land of liberty, the liberty to keep in step." And did all these extra sweeping powers keep America safe and free? By 1919, radical anti-war militants, there's an oxymoron for you, started delivering package bombs by the U.S. mail or by special delivery, including the front doorstep of Wilson's own U.S. Attorney General, John Mitchell Palmer. In fulfillment of Wilson's prophecy, with the President himself then too incapacitated to intervene, even had he wished to do so, the brutality of the war had come home to roost, and the government began field operations at home by extending the war acts into peacetime. On J. Edgar's recommendation to the still-shaken Attorney General, in 1919 was ordered the deportation of subversive radicals on so-called Red Arcs to Soviet Russia on the terms of the Alien Act, even if they were naturalized U.S.ian citizens like Emma Goldman. Those acts were later revoked, gag on that, by Congress, and so it would seem that the national government and public opinion have learned something since then. An arc of justice that moderates the hand of tyranny. One generation of abusers never seems as fierce as its predecessor. But the moderation is only relative. Sacco and Vanzetti were railroaded to the electric chair on circumstantial evidence, even though they received due process in their trial at Dedham, Massachusetts. Their judge, Webster Thayer, is quoted as saying after sentence, "Did you see what I did to those two anarchist bastards?" There's an expert of the law upholding constitutional safeguards for you. Much later, there was also Black Panther leader Fred Hampton, shot at point-blank range in bed by the Chicago PD in coordination with the FBI. We've already seen the presidentially targeted whacking of U.S. citizen Anwar al-Awlaki and the practically indefinite pre-trial detention of Bradley Manning for exposing Hillary Clinton's dirty drawers. No matter how criminal such an act might be in the sight of God and man, still a necessary evil if the State Department's first chair is ever to come clean after her occupancy. After all, violation of constitutional oaths has always been quite okay the higher you are up the bureaucratic food chain you travel. That old distinction of the torturable and non-torturable again. So, who knows what future abuses can lurk in the corners thanks to this legislation. It's true that the targets have been exceptional cases, not Occupy Wall Street protesters. There is some responsible discretion being shown, but as a constitutional law professor like President Obama should know, due process was devised precisely for the trickiest cases, not the easiest. Funny how he can ride roughshod over the Constitution, but not a bag of congressional assholes and bankers who must be appeased at all costs, especially at the costs of the sick, the elderly, and the poor. Interestingly, these are the same folks inhabiting the killable side of the equation to which I alluded in an earlier video. I guess the president intends to kill them with kindness and well-meant good intentions. But I digress. No, I don't. It's held that by legal definition, the NDAA can be applied only to those who are materially aiding an enemy in a theater of war. The problem here is that the definition of a theater of war in the War on Terror has had a way of growing ever more elastic. When broadcast towers can be bombed because they are legitimate targets of war, and bridges too for the same reason, when any bit of infrastructure can become a target in a war zone precisely because it might possibly have some military application sometime, you see the danger of convenient definition creeping into the realm of military legality as well. An ever-expanding pattern of abuse, which is as good a shorthand definition of totalitarianism as you'll find. And here's an additional benefit to administrative acts of law enforcement. You can leave the great body of liberal constitutional law untouched. By special conditional acts that sidestep these enshrined principles, the original commandments remain safely unsullied under glass, with no violation, no tinkering, no breaking, because the abusive acts being undertaken have a special extra-constitutional basis, an executive decree, for these special conditions where ordinary rule of law just simply won't work. If such rule of law won't work, then where is it really needed? I guess with mandatory sentencing and the third highest incarceration rate per capita on the planet, the rule of law seems to function best in putting drug dealers and shoplifters and chicken thieves from the wrong side of the capital gains ledger back on their side of the page. Once again, that old distinction of jailable and unjailable. While I'm at it, I might as well quote an official enemy of freedom, Fidel Castro. And in 1959, Fidel was a shining star of freedom in the hemisphere, which is forgotten now. Cuba, first free territory of America, was the official slogan. Libertad o muerte, liberty or death, was the revolution's first slogan before Patria o muerte. In February of 1959, he said to the Sugar Workers Union, "We must carry this revolution forward with all the freedoms. Regardless of how revolutionary the laws we propose to enact may be, they will be enacted without violating one single right, without suppressing even one public liberty, without beating anyone, and without even insulting anyone." A year later came the mysterious double explosion of a munition ship in Havana Harbor, La Cuba, a French vessel carrying Belgian-made NATO weapons and ammunition, that took out a section of the harbor and caused around 85 deaths, with hundreds of serious injuries. There were other acts of sabotage and terrorism, as well as targeted assassinations. So it wasn't long before Fidel's early rhetoric of humanism disappeared. The revolution's official slogan was then changed to Patria o muerte, fatherland or death, so he spoke thusly on the founding of his Citizens Neighborhood Watch, the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, or CDRs, which I will quote directly. "We are going to set up a system of collective vigilance. We're going to set up a system of revolutionary collective vigilance. And then we shall see how the lackeys of imperialism manage to operate in our midst. Because one thing is sure, we have people in all parts of the city. There's not an apartment building in the city, not a corner, not a block, not a neighborhood that is not amply represented here in this audience. In answer to the imperialist campaigns of aggression, we're going to set up a system of revolutionary collective vigilance so that everybody will know everybody else on his block. What they do, what relationship they had with the tyranny, that is, the Batista government. what they believe in, what people they meet, what activities they participate in. Because if they, the counter-revolutionaries, think they can stand up to the people, they're going to be tremendously disappointed. Because we'll confront them with the Committee of Revolutionary Vigilance on every block. When the masses are organized, there isn't a single imperialist, or a lackey of the imperialists, or anybody who has sold out to the imperialists that can operate. But wasn't an old constitutional lawyer like Fidel, who used to handle civil liberties cases and made such stirring early appeals to freedom, wasn't he worried about where such a zeal for national security might lead? Well, of course. He reassured us in language that might have been spoken on the floor of the U.S. Congress today. To wit, it was felt necessary to arrest all those persons who, for one reason or another, might be active in subversive actions in the counter-revolution, or who could be active, or who might possibly give aid to the counter-revolution. Under these conditions, naturally, some injustices are always committed. Such a result is inevitable. The nation, at such a dangerous juncture, faced with an attack of this kind, had to take every possible measure to defend itself. And for that reason, the Committees for Defense of the Revolution arrested all those persons who in some fashion or other might have threatened the nation. I repeat, there might have been cases of injustice, even some revolutionaries arrested by mistake, but any revolutionary will understand that. All without breaking one provision of the Cuban Constitution of 1940, which Fidel was fighting to restore from the Batista tyranny. Just as any U.S. patriot will understand that in times of national security, certain measures have to be taken. Nothing personal, mind you, so no hard feelings, no worries that it might change the political culture of the country. But wait a minute, Azov, all that sounds like you. You're the big Castro lover around here, so what's your friggin' problem with the NDAA then? Yeah, well, the U.S. government is not a Castro lover, is it? But it's interesting how it can adopt the same sophistries in defense of a constitution that expressly forbids such administrative actions. Which means that when the United States government speaks the same liberal pieties of freedom under the law, we can expect it to stick to these ideals at crunch time as well as El Comandante of the Cuban revolutionary process. Wait a minute, I'm gagging. Who can this be now? Hello? Nicola Sacco? Now there's a blast from the past. What do you and Bart Vanzetti make of all this noise a century later? That it's all unnecessary? That normal civil law in the state of Massachusetts or anywhere can railroad people to prison and death quite nicely without any jiggling and juggling of the Constitution, as long as bigots are running the courts and police? Well, you mean just let the normal rule of law take its course anyway? Yeah, but see what publicity you got out of it. Better to have a star chamber that whacks people out of sight, so there's no damage to our leaders' self-esteem in their shining city on the hill. And we're perched on a fiscal cliff, right on the edge of that city. Without the war on terror, the military-industrial complex might collapse, and then we'd all have money to burn. Our free market democracy couldn't survive